Joining us now from Washington after a calamitous week, Chuck Todd, host of Meet the Press. So we were just talking to the former governor of South Carolina, Mark Sanford, who talked about the David Brooks piece in the New York Times, where the columnist goes into, articulates why you should not impeach President Trump, even if you believe he committed an impeachable act. There's also George Will, who says the same thing. There's also David Axelrod, who says if you don't get the president removed from office, he could be there another 4 years. Is there a possibility now that the Congress is going to take a 2-week vacation and you're going to have members going out into their districts, that this effort to impeach Donald Trump will cool off over the next several days?
I don't think it's going to cool off. I think it's a possibility if the public is moving in that direction. But I've gotten wind already of a few tracking polls that I know of, some very reliable, some less so, but all showing the same thing. Believe it or not, support for this is actually moving up a bit. That for the first time in months, the impeachment needle has moved with independents, and I know of at least 2 polls where more independents are in favor of it than against it, and that would be a first. You know, this has mostly been driven by base Democrats before that. So I do think reading the president's voice, and I say reading because that transcript, when you read it, you hear the president's voice in your head, right? It's crystal clear. It's Donald Trump saying these things. I think that flipped a switch here that I don't know if it's going to be easy to flip off. But here's where I think you will. Like, I don't think the fever goes away. I think this investigation goes through. But on the actual vote on the articles and the decision to basically do the indictment, I think there will be a debate about whether on the timing. For all of the reasons David Brooks argued, all of the reasons George Will and I have had this discussion too. If Alexander Hamilton and James Madison were brought back right now and we asked them, right, what's the preference here? You never said when impeachment should be done, and because back then you didn't really think the people should have that much of a say in the presidential election itself, right? The Electoral College, they viewed as actually the entity that elected the president. So for them, having one entity of elites deciding who is president was one thing, and you would have another entity of elites, at least elected by the people, that would decide on his ouster. Obviously, we've changed the way we elect presidents, even though not technically, but essentially we have, in that it feels as if the voters have a say. I think when presented with our new rules, two-term limit on president, the election in 14 months, my guess is Hamilton and Madison would say the preference is to wait for the people to weigh in, and then if acts are committed, then you go through congressional action. I think during the debate about articles, that will be a debate within the Democratic Party, which is it too close to the election to do this?
I would assume that fundamental to this process going forward, and it has to go forward quickly if you're going to get it done before the Iowa caucus, is that they bring in the whistleblower behind closed doors or whatever, and not only hear from that person, but they also subpoena the individuals he talked to within the intelligence community or the White House.
Yep.
And therein lies there are your articles of impeachment.
Look, the whistleblower complaint itself, Conan, gives your witness list. So I do think they could put this together. We already have the first subpoenas have been sent to Mike Pompeo already. 5 depositions have already been set up beginning October 2nd. So I do think they know they have to move with speed here. My guess is they'll be debating the articles probably in and around Thanksgiving, and it will be handed to the Senate if they do decide to vote articles out, probably in December. And with a trial then in January, the Iowa caucuses the Monday after Super Bowl Sunday.
Who's on the program this morning?
Your friend from Burbank, Mr. Adam Schiff, will lead things off since he's the one that's going to be running the main part of this investigation. And Steve Scalise, the number 2 in the House, on the Republican side of the aisle.
Well, it is a long road that we're headed down. And I was just going to ask you that. As somebody, a student of Washington, somebody who's lived there for so long, when impeachment proceedings take place, everything grinds to a halt. And it's a different city at that point.
Honestly, it feels, like I said, you're right. It feels like people are preparing for a storm. You can already feel it. Everybody's getting ready. I fear for how, if we're polarized now, This is going to make it worse. This is going to be an awful, awful 5 months for political civility. Let's just hope that as long as we use the Constitution as our rule book, hopefully we don't go off the rails here. But it's going to be an ugly 5 months, Conan.
Chuck Todd, host of Meet the Press, every Sunday morning at 8 o'clock. Chuck, thanks for taking the time.
You got it.
NBC4's news conference program at 9 o'clock is preempted for NBC Sports. In fact, it'll be preempted for the next several weeks. We will be back October 27th. I'm Conan Nolan. Have a great Sunday.